Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating personal journey. It's one that kind of challenges how we understand belief and, well, the power of perspective.
hmm We've got this personal account from an American man who went through this pretty significant transformation in how he viewed Islam.
Yeah, a huge shift. And our source is his own story, right?
Yeah,
Shared on YouTube.
exactly. It gives us this really remarkable look at how someone can go from having these deeply negative opinions to, fully embracing a faith. And not through academic study, really, but through personal experience.
And his starting point, it's quite something. He says just 3 years before sharing this story,
Yeah.
this 38-year-old white American man, he admits he believed all Muslims were terrorists. Just flat out.
Wow. And he links that directly to media portrayals.
Directly. He talks about, the images he saw constantly in American media, weapons, violence, always linked to Islam. It's kind of a stark reminder of how powerful those narratives can be.
It really is. That availability heuristic you mentioned earlier, seeing those vivid images over and over, it sticks.
Definitely. And to really get the context for this huge change, we need to understand what was going on in his life then.
Right. He talks about a really difficult time, a painful divorce just 6 months after his son was born.
And this was despite having external success, business doing well, financially okay.
Exactly. Outwardly, things looked good, successful business, money wasn't the issue. But inside, he felt this profound unhappiness, emptiness, he called it, like he was searching for something more.
Okay, so he's in this vulnerable place. Then comes this, well, a twist, really.
His ex-wife, after their separation, she finds peace and happiness by converting to Islam.
You'd think maybe that would spark curiosity, but his first reaction was different.
Oh, completely different. Because he had those pre-existing negative ideas about Islam, her conversion actually triggered a really strong negative response in him.
How strong are we talking?
He admits feeling aggressive. He even thought about legal action, to try and stop his son from learning anything about Islam.
Wow. That really shows how deep those biases ran, just pure defensiveness.
It does. It highlights how emotionally charged the whole thing was for him at that point.
Okay, so he's in this really resistant, almost combative state. What on earth starts to shift that? How does he move from that to even considering it?
Well, it was actually a suggestion from his ex-wife. Kind of strategic, maybe. She just suggested he read the Quran for himself.
Okay.
But his reason for doing it is quite revealing. He went into it with what he himself called a know thy enemy mentality.
Know thy enemy. So not genuine curiosity, but more like opposition research.
Pretty much. His goal was actually to find things in the Quran to argue against it, to, protect his son from what he saw as this negative influence.
Right. So he dives in, ready to find fault, ready to criticize. What actually happens when he starts reading?
Well, this is where it really starts to turn. Completely contrary to what he was expecting, he found very little in the Quran that he actually disagreed with.
Really? Like what specifically?
He was really struck by the emphasis on family values, the importance of being a good person, giving charity, core principles.
Well, things most people would agree are positive.
Exactly. And this is the first big challenge to those ideas he'd absorbed. It started to chip away at the negative picture he had. It's interesting, these values echo across so many different faiths, don't they?
They absolutely do. So, okay, he's seeing these positive aspects, but he's still skeptical, right? That didn't just vanish overnight.
No, not at all. He talks about a real internal conflict. He could see the good stuff, acknowledge it, but that deep-seated skepticism was still there. He wasn't, suddenly convinced.
So how did he navigate that, being pulled in two directions?
Well, something else came into play, a motivation that was quite surprising, actually.
Surprising.
His reason for eventually agreeing that his son could learn about Islam, it came from a fear of other things he saw in society.
Other things? Like what?
He specifically mentions concerns he had about gender identity issues. He started to see Islam, believe it or not, as kind of a protective shield against those influences for his son.
Whoa, okay, that's unexpected. So he framed it as choosing the lesser of two evils.
That's exactly how he put it at the time. It's definitely a controversial way to frame it. And, his account doesn't really go deep into why he saw those other societal things as so negative, or how he squared that with the Islamic teachings he was just starting to discover.
So it wasn't about embracing Islam himself initially. It was about controlling his son's environment in a way he felt was better.
Pretty much, yeah. But that decision, that lesser of two evils choice, it led him to engage more deeply himself.
How so?
Well, to understand what his son would actually be learning, He started reading the Quran more seriously, and he began attending events at the local mosque.
Ah, okay. Getting firsthand exposure.
Yes, exactly. Things like kids programs, community bazaars.
Yeah.
It kind of fits with that contact hypothesis idea, doesn't it? That interacting directly can reduce prejudice.
It does. So what was that firsthand experience like for him at the mosque, in the community?
He really stresses the huge difference between the negative stuff he'd been fed about Islam and what he actually saw and learned.
Like night and day.
Completely. He used the phrase lied to. He felt the dominant Western narrative had just completely misrepresented it. The reality he was seeing was just so different from all the fear-based stuff.
It really makes you think about media responsibility, doesn't it?
It really does.
Can you give a specific example, something he saw at the mosque that really made an impression?
Yeah, there was one thing that really stuck with him. He noticed that if someone in the community was in need, like right there and then, the imam would ask for donations, collect the money, and give it directly to that person immediately.
Oh, wow. Very direct.
Very direct. And he contrasted that with some experiences he'd had in Christian churches where he felt, maybe there was excessive spending on buildings or things he saw as less essential.
Okay.
Now, he's careful to say, no shade against Christians. It was just his personal observation. But that directness of the charity at the mosque felt more, I guess, genuine and impactful to him.
That's a very concrete comparison. It highlights a perceived difference in how charity works, the transparency maybe.
Exactly.
And didn't he also mention something about values from a past relationship kind of clicking into place later?
Yes, that's right. He talked about a relationship ending partly because he wasn't comfortable with certain Western social norms. Things like his partner having private meetings or going on solo trips with other men.
Okay. Just things that made him uncomfortable personally.
Yeah, at the time, it was just a personal boundary thing for him, caused conflict, contributed to the breakup. But it was only later, as he learned more about Islam, that he realized those boundaries he'd instinctively wanted actually aligned pretty closely with Islamic principles around modesty and interaction between sexes.
Huh. So he saw a connection after the fact.
Right. And this realization came during a really low point for him. He mentioned being depressed after that breakup, having limited time with his son, a time when he was probably doing a lot more thinking,
Right, introspective. So he's learning, he's observing, he's having these personal realizations during a tough time. What was the actual trigger, the thing that pushed him over the edge to convert?
It was a taped message his ex-wife sent him. It was titled Message for the Sick, meant to comfort him while he was depressed.
A message from his ex-wife.
Yeah. And he describes having, what most people would see as a good life, money, health, living parents, but feeling utterly miserable inside.
That disconnect.
Exactly. And hearing that message, something just clicked. It resonated incredibly deeply. He really saw the gap between his material blessings and his inner state. That was the turning point.
That sounds like a powerful moment. So he decides, okay, I'm doing this. What was taking the Shahada like for him, the declaration of faith?
He describes it as intensely emotional. When he actually said the Shahada at the mosque,
Yeah.
he felt just completely welcomed by the Muslim community there. He talks about this overwhelming feeling like all his past mistakes were forgiven, that he had a clean slate,
A fresh start.
total fresh start. And he made a real commitment right then to avoid major sins going forward. It sounds like it was a huge release for him, a moment of real renewal.
And that wasn't the end of the family story, was it? It actually led to them getting back together.
It did, yeah. Soon after he converted, he went to his ex-wife and basically said, look, divorce is considered the most disliked permissible thing in Islam. Maybe we should reconcile, rebuild our family.
And she agreed.
She agreed. They had a nikah ceremony, remarried Islamically at the mosque, and then later they actually decided to move.
Move where?
They decided to live in Muslim-majority countries. First Costa Rica, apparently there's a community there, and then Dubai. Mainly for practical reasons, he said, easier access to halal food, easier to practice their faith day to day.
Wow, a complete life change, relocating internationally. But he said there was one major challenge in all this.
Yes. The hardest part, he says, was dealing with his own family back in the U.S., specifically his father, who is Christian.
How did his father react?
Very negatively. And the speaker attributes that reaction directly to that kind of anti-Muslim sentiment that's unfortunately pretty common in parts of America. He said it was really difficult, very emotionally charged for both of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. Family dynamics around conversion can be incredibly tough, especially with those ingrained societal views.
Definitely. It highlights how deep those biases can run, even with people you love.
But what's interesting is, despite having held those negative views himself before, he now expresses empathy for people in America who still feel that way.
He does, yeah. He explicitly says he doesn't blame them. He feels it's down to, like, societal programming and just misinformation. He used the phrase, they've been told to hate Muslims.
That's quite a shift to go from holding the views to understanding why others might hold them.
It really is. And he makes another really crucial point, one that's important whenever you talk about any large group, really.
Which is,
Don't equate the actions of individuals, even bad actions, with the teachings of the religion itself.
right, the distinction between the faith and the followers.
Exactly. He draws a parallel to Christianity, saying, some people might act in ways contrary to Christian teachings, but that doesn't mean Christianity itself isn't a peaceful religion. He applies the same logic to Islam.
Yeah, that's such a key point. So after all this whole journey, what's his core belief about Islam now?
He's very clear. He firmly believes Islam is a religion of peace. He says that if you sincerely follow its principles, it leads to inner peace and a more stable life.
Stable how?
He mentions things like not having to worry about his wife's interactions with other men or issues around drugs and alcohol. He references his own 3 years of sobriety, saying, mashallah. He sees Islam as a kind of beneficial system for living a well-ordered, happy life.
So it provided structure and values that resonated deeply and brought him peace.
That's the core of it. A complete turnaround in his perspective, finding a value system that worked for him.
It's an amazing transformation, but it wasn't just emotional or spiritual, right? There were practical financial consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really significant part of his story. His conversion hit his U.S.-based business consulting company hard.
How so?
Because of his newfound commitment to Islamic principles, he decided he could no longer engage in any transactions involving riba.
Riba. That's interest, essentially, like
Yeah.
charging or paying interest.
Exactly. That concept is generally prohibited in Islamic finance. So making that stand, refusing deals involving interest, he said his revenue dropped by 60%, almost immediately.
60%, wow, that's huge.
Huge. It led to serious financial problems. He said he almost went bankrupt. It really shows the depth of his commitment, making such a massive financial sacrifice for his faith.
Definitely underscores how profoundly his priorities shifted. Did he recover?
He did, eventually.
Yeah.
He managed to rebuild the company, get it profitable again, though he mentioned it's not back to where it was before, because he still sticks to those principles about avoiding interest.
So he's still holding firm on that.
Yeah. And now he's focusing more on trying to establish businesses in Muslim regions, places where the financial systems might align better with his values.
It really does show that deep commitment, even when it came at a significant personal cost. And it sounds like he's open to talking more about it.
Yes. At the end of his video, he invites people to ask questions in the comments.
Yeah.
Seems very willing to share more of his experience.
Okay, so let's just recap this incredible story. We followed this American man's journey from, frankly, animosity and views shaped heavily by negative media
Right. Thinking all Muslims were terrorists.
to fully embracing Islam. And it wasn't overnight. It was this gradual process sparked by tough personal times, his ex-wife's influence, but crucially, his own decision to actually read the Quran.
Even if it started as knowing the enemy.
And then having those firsthand experiences with the Muslim community that just completely shattered his previous assumptions.
Yeah, that contrast seems key. The huge gap between the stereotype he expected and the reality he found. That was the big aha moment, the thing that really drove the change.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the power of just direct experience and how important it is to question the narratives we're given, especially when they might be biased. Kind of begs the question for all of us, what assumptions are we holding on to that might need a closer look?
That's definitely the takeaway question. And maybe the most thought-provoking part of this whole account is seeing how profound personal change can come from places you least expect. It shows that even deeply held beliefs can be challenged and transformed, sometimes when you're just trying to understand something you initially feared or opposed. A real reminder to keep an open mind, maybe.